Wanted to thank everyone for being here today, in particular with our special guest, the speaker, Anthony Rota, for joining us here on our Zoom call in Sault Ste. Marie. And before I begin, I wanted to make sure that we give the proper land acknowledgement to the people that we share our land with, that we're on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe people and also the Métis. So here in the Sioux, we have Ojibwe, Métis. We also have Cree as well. Mr. Rhoda, I think you have Ojibwe and Algonquin in your area as well. So I wanted to make sure that we give a land acknowledgement to before we begin. And welcome everyone. We're here and people are joining us, continue to join us. We're just getting started. I see people popping in. It's really neat to see some faces. You know, during this COVID-19, I haven't been able to see all of you, and it's great to see you all, yes. And I can tell you, I'm really excited to have Speaker Rhoda here today because we're celebrating Italian Heritage Month here in Canada. Back in 2016, there was a private members bill that I was proud to stand up and support, declaring, that the month of June be the National Heritage Month. And it's really, really special that we have the speaker, Anthony Rota. But before I introduce him, I just wanted to go through a couple of housekeeping rules. We're on a Zoom call here. We're here to talk about Italian heritage. We're here to talk about the Speaker, the House of Commons, so the procedure, the rules, and whatnot, and roles and responsibilities. And it's just really, really awesome. Any specific political questions that people may have, because this is a nonpartisan event. This is not a liberal event. It's open to everyone. We've had people that sign up that are from different parties and whatnot. So this again is a nonpartisan event. Education, information. If you have any political questions or questions regarding funding or anything like that, please feel free to contact my office at 705-941-2900 or email me at terry.sheehan@parl, P-A-R-L .gc.ca, and we'll get those answers to you. I see Rory Ring, the president of the Chamber of Commerce here, and I've been on lots of Zoom calls with him that he's been quarterbacking, and he always begins, and many other Zoom calls begin with the following, that, no hacking. This is a no hacking zone. If there's any attempt to hack or any inappropriate behavior, Jennifer McNabb, my assistant, has a big red button and will shut it down pretty quick. And there's no pressure either because you have the Speaker of the House here, Jen, because he's all about keeping things in order. So without further ado, I just wanted to go over those few things, and I wanted to acknowledge that we have with us today Matthew Scott, City Councillor for Ward 5, and I would like to call on him to say a few words of welcome to the city, to Speaker Rhoda, and to all of you here today. Thank you. So Jen, could you unmute Matthew, please?
Thank you, Mr. Sheehan. On behalf of the City of Sault Ste. Marie, representing City Council, I would like to thank the Honourable Mr. Rota for being here today, giving this speech about, or this chat about Italian Heritage Month. Specifically, I am the City Councillor for Ward 5 in the West End, which has a very rich Italian heritage. Growing up in a more Italian dense neighborhood, I myself am not personally Italian, but I was exposed to many aspects of the culture. I grew up around it. My wife is in fact Italian. So I very much enjoy getting to experience all of the rich culture in the city for the Italian heritage. So I would like to thank you for taking the time today. I look forward to the chat, and thank you as well, Mr. Sheehan.
Thank you very much, Councillor. That was fantastic. And yes, Ward 5, which when I was on council was a combination of 6 and 5. So I certainly can attest to the dense Italian population in various areas of there and a very rich heritage. So thank you. So I'm going to begin by reading the bio for Speaker Rota. On December 5th, 2019, the Honourable Anthony Rota was elected as the 37th Speaker of the House of Commons for the 43rd Parliament. On April 20th, 2020, he was also appointed chair of the Special Committee on COVID-19 pandemic. The special committee was established to examine the government response to the pandemic and includes all members of the House of Commons. Mr. Rota, member for the electoral district of Nipissing-Temiskaming, was first elected in 2004 and served in the 38th Parliament as chair of the subcommittee on Veterans Affairs of the Standing Committee on National Defence. Re-elected in 2006, he was vice chair of the Standing Committee on Veterans Affairs from 2007 to 2011. He served as the Liberal Party caucus chair. During that time, Mr. Rota also served as critic for the Federal Economic Development Agency for Northern Ontario, FEDNOR. In the 40th Parliament, he was vice chair of the Standing Committee on Industry, Science and Technology. In 2011, Mr. Rota joined Nipissing University in North Bay, Ontario, where he served as Director of Government Relations. He ran for re-election in 2015 and won his seat for the 42nd Parliament. On December 9, 2015, he was appointed Assistant Deputy Speaker and Assistant Deputy Chair of Committees of the Whole. Prior to his election to the House of Commons, in 2004, Mr. Rota worked for the National Research Council's Industrial Research Assistance Program as Regional Manager for Ontario and in the field of international technology transfer. He also worked as an entrepreneurial in the financial and real estate sector, during which time he served as President of the North Bay and District Chamber of Commerce. He was subsequently elected to City Council for the City of North Bay, where he served as Chair of Planning and Economic Development. Mr. Rota holds a bachelor's degree in political science and a master's of business administration. He is fluent in English, French, Italian, and Spanish. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, Mr. Anthony Rota, or I should say Speaker Rota. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Terry. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. And buongiorno a tutti. Spero che tutto va bene. Se avete qualche questione in italiano, sentite l'adagio di parlarmi in italiano. Vi posso rispondere. I was just saying that if you've got any questions in Italian, please feel free to ask them. Et aussi en français, si vous voulez, vous pouvez demander des questions en français. Alors, sentez-vous à l'aise. It is a pleasure to be here, and it's nice to see so many of you interested. And I just thought I'd talk a little bit first about my background, because it is Italian Heritage Month, and it's something I see a lot of proud faces there who are proud of their heritage. I think everybody's proud of their heritage, just some of you happen to be Italian this month. And that's something that's very important. My grandfather first came to Northern Ontario back in 1903. He came here because there was work, and there wasn't much in southern Italy. He came from a small town called Pietrafitta in the province of Cosenza, and so coming here in November of 1903 and working on the railway, and that's what he was working on, building that railway up to Cochrane. I'm sure he had some thoughts in the middle of January thinking, okay, it's cold in southern Italy in the winter, but nothing like Northern Ontario. So I often wonder what went through his mind. And it's interesting to follow his trip, because he first came in 1903 and then went back a couple of years later, and then came back again, and then back again in 1909, bringing the rest of the family. Now, my father was the first born in Canada. He was born in 1915 here in North Bay. So I guess on that end, I'm the second generation Italian. So they came over, they were working on the railway, and in 1924, what ended up happening, my father was only 9 years old, but my uncle and my grandfather and my grandmother, actually I think it was more my grandmother than my grandfather, decided to open a bakery. Some of you may have remembered City Bakery or Aunt May's here in North Bay, and it was, I see some thumbs coming up, that was good. It ended up being the largest bakery in Northern Ontario by the time it was bought up multiple times since he sold it. He sold it back in '71, so and retired. But it got bought up by multinationals, and now it belongs to, I think it's a big Mexican company, and they operate their own brand. It was more about buying the network. That's on my father's side. And on my mother's side, my father went over for a visit to Italy and ended up meeting my mother. And fell head over heels in love with her, I guess is the way to describe it. And he came back to Canada and then went back again. And he was very tenacious and ended up marrying her. And then they came back. So they came back in 1960. So my mother is she was an immigrant to Canada, and it's been interesting because I've been very fortunate to have the Canadian background, which is Francophone and Anglophone, having gone to a French school. My mother being Italian, so she spoke to me in Italian all the time. And every second summer, we would spend in Italy. So we would go and visit my mother's family. And growing up, it was very interesting. So it worked out well. My dad spoke to me in English, my mother in Italian. They sent me to a French school. And while I was in high school, I took some Spanish, and comes in handy, especially nowadays. So on a personal level, you know where I came from and what background I have that way, which is certainly a little different than most Canadians, but very similar to many, and especially when we talk about immigrants coming to Canada now. And it's almost like when whoever the last one in is gets blamed for everything, or is the whipping, I was going to say whipping boy, but I'm not sure that's appropriate, the whipping person. And we've gone through that, and many Italians have assimilated and grown into the Canadian culture by now, so it works out very well. And being in Parliament was certainly something I was very proud of. And on December 5th of 2019 was a very special day when I was elected Speaker. And the election of the Speaker is something that's been going on since 1988. Prior to that, it was an appointment by the Prime Minister. So I'm proud to say that I'm the first Speaker of Italian descent, which is something that like I say, I'm very proud to have that. And people often ask, what is the main role of the Speaker? Well, if I had to pick one role, I don't think we could pick one, but there's three main roles that exist. The first one, of course, is the one that everybody sees, and that's presiding over the deliberations that go on in the House. And that's making sure that the rules and standing orders are enforced in the House, and make sure that parliamentary practice is observed. Not an easy one, let me tell you, but that is probably the most obvious one. One of the ones that comes up with that is the procedural, or the administration. And what ends up happening with the administration is being the chair of the Board of Internal Economy. And they make sure that all the operations on the House comes together. So I chair that, or the Speaker chairs that, and that makes sure that all our operations work well. The other thing that not many people see is the diplomatic end of things. So whenever we have visitors coming to the House or to Parliament, one of the people they want to see, of course, is the Prime Minister, but they also want to meet with the Speaker of the House. And it's interesting, all the people who came through up until COVID, it was actually quite busy. But that doesn't stop us now, because we still continue much of that. And much of that is happening with Zoom or telephone. I've had the good fortune of meeting many of my fellow speakers prior to COVID, but I've also kept up the relationship and met many more online, whether it was a Speaker of New Zealand, the House of Commons in England and the UK, the speakers of the House across Canada in the different provinces, and Wales, and the conversations continue to go on that way. And the nice thing about there is the relationship with Canada through official means is continuing, and we keep that exchange going. So we're exchanging ideas, finding out what we're doing. The Italian speaker and I have become good friends, and we've talked quite a number of times. Roberto Fico, who is having challenges of his own, but they seem to be coming out of it. The last time I spoke to him was about a week ago, and they seem to be pulling out finally, and things are looking very positive in Italy. One of the things that I'll go back a bit to some of the areas that cover the speaker's job. And one of them is, of course, in the House when you're trying to rule on different things that go on. One of the functions that must be carried out is one of impartiality, making sure that everything is done as neutral as possible. And you want to have that concept of impartiality central to every Canadian speaker, to make sure that when a decision is made, someone can look and say, okay, that person is fair and they've done things based on the rules, not based on the party which they come from. And so you can't take sides. My convention is to make sure that everything's impartial, and by doing so, if you'll notice, I abstain from all partisan activity, such as caucus meetings and some of the promotions that go on. No part of debate in the House of Commons other than making sure that everybody is staying within line and not doing anything out of order. And the only time that I can vote as Speaker is if there's a tie. And that's something that has happened once already. And usually what happens there is when a tie happens, you kind of go back to, okay, what would the status quo be? And that's the way you normally go. So that's how that works. Like I said, the diplomatic component of the role of the Speaker is that the Speaker receives international heads of state and parliamentary delegations, and the Speaker also leads regular parliamentary delegations to visit counterparts in other parts of the world or other parts of the country. Unfortunately, that part hasn't materialized just yet. It came up a bit. We were off to Mexico and had quite a number of people into Canada, but with COVID being there, that kind of changed things quite a bit. Now, the Speaker is also an MP, and that's something that sometimes isn't quite as easy. The work of an MP, as Terry will tell you, involves contact with constituents in Ottawa and in the riding, and include meeting with special interest groups, charity events, helping constituents, and granting media interviews. Now, Nipissing-Temiskaming in Northern Ontario spans about 15,000 square kilometers and includes 17 communities and 2 reserves. Now that's a lot of travel. There's between Ottawa and North Bay, and but between North Bay where I live and the rest of the riding, which certainly makes it interesting. But many MPs have larger, more remote ridings, so I really lose my right to complain when it comes to traveling around the riding. But it's important to make sure that my writing's voice is heard in Ottawa. And, you know, being the Speaker, you do have that responsibility not only to your writing, but also to the House. And doing it in an impartial way is not always easy, but it's something that I work on. And those who've known me from before know that it's just the way I am. I'm not the hyper-partisan type that goes for the jugular every time. It's more about, okay, how can we work together and make sure that this works? So the one thing that's come up a few times is people ask, well, how do I watch what's going on? Of course, there's a CPAC in the House, but if any of you want to watch what's gone on in the past, I invite you to go to Parlview, PARLVUU.ca, and with that, what you can do is set something up and actually watch what's going on now, or watch any episode or any session of Parliament that's gone on over the years. So let's say Mr. Sheehan had said something way back when and you wanted to check up on him. you could see one of his SO31s or some question or something he's answered in the House of Commons. And that comes really well. Or you could just sit there and watch a whole session for the day if you don't have any tape to watch dry at home. So, no, it can get exciting many times. But overall, it is a real honor. And I could go on talking for a while. So I'll pass it on back to Terry Sheehan and go from there. It's nice to see some familiar faces out there. I see Mr. and Mrs. Caricato, Anthony, who works for me. Rocco Rossi. I haven't seen you in a long time. Nice to see you again. So, and some of them, a lot of familiar faces. Anyways, Terry, I'll pass it on back to you, and we'll go for comments and questions.
Well, thank you very much. And since we have a special guest, we have two special guests just joined us. Rocco Rossi, who is the Chamber of Commerce president for all of Ontario. So thank you very much, Rory Ring, for inviting Rocco Rossi to this. And apparently, Speaker Rota knows Rocco, so I would like to unmute his microphone because I think he's trying to say hi there, and maybe say a few words, Rocco, please.
Mille grazie, piacere di stare con voi. Particularly Italian Heritage Month, and as Speaker Rota was saying, for those who've known him for a long time, they know him not to be hyper-partisan, a fair-minded person. I've had the great pleasure of knowing him for a very long time, and those words have never been truer of any other individual that I know. We are in very good hands. With him managing a very difficult circumstance, which is often referred to as herding cats. He does it better and with more elan than anyone else I know. And I think it's the Italian heritage in him that gives him that special power. I know it's more for discussion, so just thank you for allowing me to come. And I did want to highlight not just a shout out to my dear friend Rory Ring from the Sioux, and a place I consider one of my second homes because of the great Italian food that I can get in the Sioux, but also to give me a moment really to congratulate and thank through the Speaker to the House of Commons and really all parties. We have been living in extraordinary times, times that many people have said, this is a time with no playbook. And what I like to say in those times is when you have no playbook, the most important thing that you can have are great players and great teamwork, because things are changing each and every day, and governments are really not designed to move quickly. And for good reason. They're meant to think about policy. They're meant to deliberate. They're meant to think through what the unintended consequences might be. And so policy typically takes months, if not years. And the virus has been insisting that governments at all levels act in days, in hours, which is very difficult, will lead to issues. And there'll be no doubt times in the future when people say, well, this was a mistake, this was a mistake. That is the luxury of hindsight. Right now, what I like to say is no one should question the cost of a parachute as you're falling. And this is what has had to be done, and what collaboration at all levels of government is achieving in a way that we as Canadians, as Ontarians, should be extremely proud. Because the notion that just because there's a crisis, everyone will come together and do the right thing clearly is not the case when we look south of the border. So it is not an automatic that collaboration happens. And there will be debates, there will be discussions, there's no question. But we have been thrilled with the interaction with the government, with governments at all levels, and willingness to keep iterating with policies to make them work better to get us through to the other side. Thanks for the time, Terry. A great pleasure. Auguri a tutti.
Grazie. If I can comment on Kerry from there,
yes, please, Anthony.
it was interesting because he brought up a very good point. And one thing you often hear from people is, oh, it takes so long for government to put policy together. And Rocco, having been at the government level, at federal and different levels, provincial as well, has seen what it takes to put it together. And it's something that the government has put something together. And I say the government very inclusively, all of Parliament, and he brings up a very good point. All sides have come together and worked so well, regardless of party. A little bit of a scuffle here and there, but that's human nature. But you looked at the federal level, then you looked at the provincial level, and they worked well together and amongst themselves. And then with the municipal level as well. I know we have Al McDonald here in North Bay and Christian Provenzano, who I know very well out of Sault Ste. Marie. That interaction and that ability to work together under these circumstances has been outstanding. I'm very proud to be Canadian when something like this comes together, because it would have been easy to be partisan all the way through. But no, they put the whole thing out and said, yes, we can do this together, and they have been working together, and it's been working out very well. But like I started off, there's a reason why it takes so long to put policy together, because what happens is you have all this input along the way. And as you're going, you're getting input, you're getting from different sides of the equation, so that by the time you get to the end, 6 months, a year later, you've heard all the pros and cons and you've adjusted everything. What you saw now is, okay, this is a good idea, we need it, let's get it out as quickly as possible. And everyone agreed to it. But as you get into it, you realize, oh, we left somebody out. Oh, this doesn't work. We have to add that and this. And they've been working beautifully together to get that out there. So a big shout out to all the MPs, the MPPs, mayors, and city councils across Canada for all the work they've been doing, because it certainly has been an honor to watch them work together.
And if I can just put in one more plug with two short parts. One, I hope that that virtue and willingness to revisit, to make things right, will continue when it comes to the rental subsidy, which is a huge issue still for so many of our members. And two, you mentioned municipalities, and that is critical. They have been shouldering big financial burdens through all of this, have far fewer fiscal tools to work with. And if we're going to have a robust recovery, there has to be thought with the province and the federal government putting something together for municipalities, because otherwise a lot of those property taxes that have been deferred, fees that have been deferred, and additional costs that have been incurred to help people through this period, municipalities are going to be stuck with massive bills and an inability to add debt by regulation, by law.
That's a very good point. As a former president of the Chamber of Commerce here in North Bay, and as a former city councillor, I have a tremendous amount of respect for city councils. That's the front line, and it's not always easy because you're there, and when someone calls, they expect you to do it right away, and your resources are not always easy to access, or if you have them at all. So yes, good points, Rocco.
Yes, excellent points, Rocco, and you do us an honor by joining us today. Thank you so much, very much.
You do me the honor, trust me.
Appreciate it. And speaking of city councillors, I see City Councillor Matthew Shoemaker has joined us. We had Matthew Scott bring opening remarks, so I just wanted to turn Matthew Shoemaker's mic on to say a couple of words, and thank you very much for joining us, Matthew.
Thank you, Terry, for having me. Grazie, Anthony, per essere qua in Sault Ste. Marie oggi con noi. Obviously, Rocco hit on some important points. Terry, as a former councillor, knows the struggle that councils face. You know, increased expenses on operating systems like our transit system, where the ridership is way down. And I know there's PTIF funding out there, that's existing funding, but that's not, that doesn't exactly jive with the situation we're currently facing. So I can appreciate that that there has been help and there continues to be help through the gas tax funding and things of that nature. But I do think that some, I hate to call it new assistance or additional assistance, but I think that's really where the
Crisis assistance.
that's right. Crisis assistance that the city could use in these more difficult times. So appreciate you being here and listening, obviously, and hi to my fellow Suites, including those in Ottawa. I see Anthony Kirkado there. So hi and welcome back to the Sioux, even if it's virtually.
Thank you. That's perfect. Thank you very much, Councillor. That was great. And I just wanted to thank everyone again. I have some questions that have been formulated, and we'll answer some of them. Speaker Rota may have answered some of these already, so they maybe repeating or shorten them. And then if there's a little bit of opportunity, I'll turn some mics on to people if they have any particular questions they wanted to ask the speaker. Just raise your hand after, and we'll turn your mic on. So. Mr. Speaker, I guess one of the things that everyone's been wondering is the following question. What has it been like being the speaker during the COVID-19 pandemic? What has been the biggest change?
This is not what I signed up for, but it certainly has been interesting. The biggest change or the biggest challenge was, how do we get everybody to express their voice? And of course, the rules exist in the House, and the members in the chamber can make the rules and change the rules. The speaker basically implements what they decide to do. And I know there's been direction given and some unanimity. And our big challenge at first was finding a way to get as many people to participate as possible. And the members came up with the COVID-19 committee, which I chair. And in that initially was for everyone to be able to come up with questions or come up with concerns about what pertained to COVID-19, and started off by meeting 3 times a week. And it allowed members to question government. It allowed to present petitions. It allowed ministers to make statements. And that was the bulk of it. And about 3 weeks ago, then it got amended and it got expanded a little bit more, where the questions could have been on pretty well anything. And but one of the biggest challenges that we had along the way was seeing what technology was out there, because when we first got hit with this, we were used to coming to the House in the chamber, and that's where we did all our business. Doing it remotely, we had to figure out ways to do it. And I got to tell you, the staff that we have in our IT department and in our clerks department and our communications are amazing. Each one of them took their responsibility and ran with it. And we saw stuff happen that when we first started, I thought there's no way this is going to happen. We can't, I don't see how this can happen, but let's see how far we can get. And we far surpassed anything I would have dreamed of up front. So the main thing was the technology. The other thing is meeting with people, your constituents and members, like we're doing right now. This has now become the norm, and it's not out of the ordinary to video conference somebody. I talked about meeting with speakers from around the world, and that's something that I continue to do, and around the country. And we actually have visible conversations where you can see, as you can see my Italian background, you see my hands waving back and forth. I'm sorry, I can't help that. But, and you can have that conversation and you can see each other and see the feeling that's there. It's not like being in person, but it's pretty darn close.
Well, thank you very much. That was very, very insightful, and you're doing an exceptional job. And the only comments that I'll chime in on is just absolutely excellent. When we first started doing the COVID-19 committee that you chair, people would say technical difficulties, but a lot of times it's just Terry Sheehan saying it was just kind of like they forgot to push a button like I just did, or they, didn't have their headset done right. But I think we've all gotten really, really, really good at it. It's like second nature. So it is very possible. Now, here's a question. How does the Speaker keep decorum in the House of Commons, Mr. Speaker?
Same way he would herd cats, as Rocco said. You know what? What happens in the House is I've been there for a while, and I was assistant deputy speaker for a while. And what I find is if there's shouting going on and going back and forth, and if the speaker starts shouting as well, it doesn't get any better. And I'm very fortunate in that my wife is a retired teacher. So I got to learn a lot from her and how she dealt with her class and how to keep them in order. And what I find sometimes, rather than getting up and shouting order or quiet, what I find is just standing there and just looking on. And it's amazing. It might take a little bit longer at times, but most of the times it's a lot quicker, where people look and say, okay, I think we have to stop now. And people calm right down. So maintaining order, of course, we have some rules when they have to be applied. But I think overall, MPs are generally good people who are there to do a job, and very emotional. They get carried away. And once they realize that, oh, we're getting a little bit out of hand, they calm right down. And what's interesting by that, using that technique, I do get quite a number of teachers, MPs who used to be teachers, come to see me and say, yeah, that used to work for me too when I was in class.
I see a couple of teachers like Donna Caricato shaking her head yes, so I think you have some agreement there. This
Sadly, too
question,
many lawyers around.
that's good. So a question I have, and it's just interest, what advice would you give to a young person that might be interested in being a speaker one day? What kind of courses or jobs should they take? What kind of advice would you give to somebody who a younger person? One and Jonathan Boyer Nolan just left. He was the president of the Sioux College. President of the Sioux College Association. He had another call to take, but I just wanted to acknowledge that he was on here too as well with his interest. So, Mr. Speaker.
Yeah, no, actually, I'm not sure there is anything that can prepare you for being a speaker, other than if you're involved in the community and you get involved in committees and boards in different organizations. What I found myself doing is, as I joined organizations or committees or groups or even on city council, I usually ended up chairing a committee. And my wife seems to think it's because I like to keep control of things. I'm not sure that's quite the reason, but I do tend to direct things quite a bit. If I've been to meetings where I'll sit quietly and listen, and as long as everything's going smoothly, I'm very quiet and I'll just kind of go along or put in my 2 cents where needed. But if I notice everything going sideways or derailed, I tend to have a habit of, well, directing things if whoever's supposed to be directing isn't directing. That's just one of my faults or one of my qualities, I guess. I'm not sure which way you'd look at it, depending on the situation. But I would recommend to anyone who has interest in politics or becoming speaker. The speakers is like this is a dream that I'm not sure if you can plan on it. But being here is an honor. But what I recommend is getting involved and getting the hang of how to work with people, whether it's chairing or a committee, board, or any other organization that's out there.
That is excellent. And you certainly did cover off where your family is from in Italy, and you told your immigration story. And one of the things that I find, especially in Sault Ste. Marie and the rest of Canada, is that Italians have such a great immigration story that they're some of the most welcoming people to the newcomers here in Sault Ste. Marie. The Marconi Club, the Calabrese Association, they're so welcoming, and they're the ones that are volunteering with the newcomers, helping them get settled in and whatnot. And I know we have a few people like Helen from the Marconi Club here, and Guido as well from the Calabrese as well. So I just wanted to acknowledge that and say that I think that if you wanted to sort of expand on those comments about this whole welcoming society that we have and how it is in your perspective about how the Italians are also so welcoming to other cultures as in Canada as newcomers. continue to come.
Well, I see Helen and Guido on there, and it's great to see them. A big shout out to both of you, and thank you for joining us today. The Italian community in Canada, and I can speak for Northern Ontario especially, it wasn't always easy, whether it was during the war or even prior to the war. And like when I grew up, I was the visible minority. Apparently, my skin was olive when I grew up. I'm not sure what that means, but that's what they told me. And I won't say some of the other names they told me, but it wasn't always easy. And I think a lot of Italian people know that, and they've lived part of it, and they can relate to that. So when somebody new comes to Canada, we know what Canada is able to give us. It can give us a life that is equal to nowhere else in the world. But it's not always easy. But when we see someone coming from another country, it's very important that we make them feel at home and make them feel like they are Canadian. And that's one thing that I know. I'm starting to get a little choked up here, but it really gets to me when people say, oh, those people. When somebody says those people, I just lose it. It's everyone who comes to Canada comes here to build a future. And this is a wonderful country to build a future in. So regardless of where you come from, you have to look at it and say, you know, we're building together. And that's something that I believe that Italian Canadians understand. And that's why they work with other people who come from other countries for two reasons. One, they know what the potential of Canada is, and they know what the sting of racism does. And the tone of your skin or the color of your skin should not have anything to do with whether you are successful or not in Canada. It should be in what you have to offer and how hard you work. And that's something that I think all new immigrants really get to know when they get here, and they work hard. And if you look at most new Canadians, actually I'd say the largest majority of new Canadians, they're very successful because they see something that sometimes some of us take for granted.
Well, thank you very much. Those are very remarkable words. Thank you. And the couple other questions we have over here. Other than presiding over question period, what other things might you do in a day?
As you would probably contest to as an MP, what I usually tell people is the only certain thing about my day or my life as an MP and as a speaker is uncertainty. It changes from 1 minute to the next. So you go from chairing a committee, let's say the Board of Internal Economy, meeting in front of another committee. Lately, the Procedures and House Affairs Committee has been meeting to figure out how we can have alternate ways of meeting as a parliament. So I've had to go there, and usually it's for an hour session where they'll ask you all kinds of questions on how the Parliament works. The diplomatic point of things, where you have visitors from heads of state, the speakers from other countries, visiting MPs who want to meet with you. I had one MP come and see me one day and said, I've got, I'm trying to think of the person's name. Of course, I'm drawing a blank. He's a popular country music singer, and he would like to come in. And I've had that happen. Hockey players come in and say, can we just pop in for a second? And usually it's an MP bringing a constituent like someone in, and just for a few minutes to say hello. But the diplomatic end of things, administration of the Hill operations, as well as dealing with the clerk, who is bringing different options to you on how things are evolving in on the Hill. So it really does vary from one day to the next, and I'll be honest with you, one moment to the next. Sometimes you figure you got your day all planned out, and it goes in a completely other direction.
Thank you. And Rory Ring would like to make a comment or a question. So if I get Jen to, yep.
Well, if I can get a question in my comments, I will.
Sure,
but,
either one.
I want to thank Speaker Rota for joining us, and I want to echo all of Rocco Rossi's comments, but I'm afraid I can't do any of them in Italian. But I, like Matthew, am married to an Italian, Michelle Cicchini. So we have a very passionate household, shall we say. He's also French-Italian. But I really want to thank you for joining us. It is a very important month for us to recognize Italian heritage. I grew up in Etobicoke next to the Roccos, the Pezzamentis, the Caravaggios, and all of them entrepreneurs, all of them coming as immigrants to Canada and creating an entrepreneurial base in our country that has led us, really to the great successes that we've had in Canada. So, it's without immigration, it's not without immigration that we can't become a greater country. And how our community, our Italian community, embraces our new immigrants now is really to, I think, be held as a standard for the globe. So important for us to have that entrepreneurship develop out of immigration. My father came over in 1951, landed at Pier 21, and there was a monument to the great influx of Italian heritage that we came to Canada after the war. And I certainly encourage anybody to go to Halifax and to have that experience. So, you talked a little bit up front, so I'll get to my question, and that is, how much of that experience, the Italian experience, how much of that has been able to give you the tools to deal with your role as a speaker, the entrepreneurship, the coming to a new country, the passion? And I also just want to say, I also just came off the phone with the current president of the North Bay Chamber of Commerce, Peter Tirico. And how do you bring that experience to bear on your role as speaker?
Yeah, Peter and I are good friends. A great guy, so it's nice to see the communications between the two. You know what? As immigration is probably one of the biggest influencers in Canada, and people often wonder, what exactly does an immigrant look like, or what does immigration look like in Canada? Well, I often use an example where my grandfather came here in 1903, so I'm the grandson of an immigrant. My mother came in 1960. I'm the son of an immigrant. And I adopted my daughter from China. I'm the father of an immigrant. So I've got immigration all around me, and it is making this country a better place. And being Italian, as was mentioned, because you have gone through a certain amount of, you're not really sure where you fit in when you first get here. And even if you're born here, you have that interpretation where, like, okay, I don't really have a place to fit in because you're not quite there. And that's something that I would imagine is normal for the first generation, but the immigrant, but the first generation who's born here shouldn't feel that. And that's something that I think is very important. It's interesting because when I first got elected, and I gave my little speech on from the chair of the speaker, I had done a lot of work getting to the speaker's chair, but the one thing I hadn't done was getting that speech ready for acceptance. And it's funny how, I don't know if I thought it would jinx it or what it was, but I had written down about a few points, and I just spoke from the heart. And what I found was I had a lot of children of immigrants come to see me, whether they were African American, they were Asian, they were from different countries around the world. And they said, I can relate to what you said. And I thought, it was sad that they can relate, but I'm glad that we brought it out. And that people can look at it and say, you know what? Somebody who's born in Canada is a Canadian. And that to me is very important. So, and that's a message we have to get out there. So if you're immigrating to Canada, you have to know that your children will feel wanted and they will feel Canadian. And to me, that's always been a very important part of who I am and what I do.
All right, I have a message here on the group chat, so I can ask one more question, and then we are getting close to 1 o'clock, and so I'm going to ask a question from Donna Caricato. And Mr. Speaker, during this month, have you been able to meet with other Italian communities elsewhere? Or are we the first?
You're the first. And thank you for facilitating. I know I've had many phone calls with my local community individually, but not as online. So yeah, hopefully this is the first of many. And I invite all other MPs and other people who want to speak. By all means, this is certainly interesting, and it allows a chance to talk and exchange ideas.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I think that's an excellent way to wrap things up. Would like to thank everyone for being here today. It is an absolutely amazing way to celebrate Italian Heritage Month. There's 16,000 people that trace their roots to Italy in Sault Ste. Marie, just the city itself. According to StatsCan, it's English is the #1 spoken language, followed by Italian and then French. So you can see how prevalent it is, not just the ethnic background, but how people have kept the language and how they've kept their culture so alive. And if you go back to, Councillor Matthew Scott's comments in representing Ward 5, which used to be 6 and 5 when I was there, and of course up in Ward 3, every ward, I was a councillor for Ward 2, has pockets of little Italian neighborhoods, and it's just like you're like in Italy. You go in there, when you knock on doors, you're greeted not with just a thank you or whatever. It's nice they take a sign or whatever, but you know what you usually leave with? Tomatoes, some other vegetable from their garden, and it's great because you're able to feed your family when you're knocking on doors here in the Sioux. But Mr. Speaker, I'm going to turn that back over to you to just make some closing remarks, and I want to thank each and every single one of you for being here. Matthew Shoemaker, thank you very much. Grazie. Another Calabrese, I believe, right? Calabrese, yes. And Rocco, I wasn't too sure where you were from, but I think you said.
Julia.
Okay, very nice.
He's on the wrong side of the boot, but that's
other
okay.
side
We
of
like
the
the middle.
I knew I was going to start something.
You
said
said you've only got 16,000 in the Sioux. That's like my family is about half that.
So then the Matthew Scott, thank you very much too as well, and for representing your people so greatly, and appreciate your kind words. So again, Rory, to everybody here on the call, again, the Calabrese that are being represented, the Marconi, just everyone, it just makes me so happy. And we do have the best restaurants, Mr. Speaker, in all of Canada, the best Italian restaurants. It's absolutely amazing that so few franchise restaurants, and when I was growing up, was like never heard of ever. It's all Italian name, Giovanni's. I just started naming them. Now I got to name them all, but I can't. So I'm going to stop right there. So anyways, without further ado, Mr. Speaker, I would like to turn it over to you for some closing remarks. Grazie.
Grazie a lei. No, it's been a real pleasure, and it's nice to have these conversations sometimes, just to kind of hear each other and know that we're not alone, and especially in this time of COVID when we've been isolated. So it's nice to see everyone come together. And Terry, thank you for putting this together. E anche quelli che sono venuti oggi voglio ringraziarvi perché la nostra cultura è importante e questo mese è il nostro mese e vogliamo essere sicuri che lo possiamo sentire non solo la voce, però nel nostro cuore. Allora a tutti voi vi ringrazio. Lo so che non è sempre stato facile per gli italiani in Canada, però per tutti che siete venuti prima di noi, grazie per il lavoro che avete fatto, perché in facendo questo noi possiamo avanzare e quello che faccio adesso non l'avrei mai fatto se voi non avete fatto i sacrifici. Allora, per quelli che sono più anziani, grazie a lei. And to all of you, I just want to thank everyone. And one of the things that we did bring up was the immigrant story. And that's something that everybody has to remember. So if you see someone coming from another country, remember, that was you 1, 2, 3 generations ago. So treat them the way you'd want to be treated. Thank you very much, Terry. It was a pleasure being here with you today.
Grazie. Ciao.
Ciao. Buongiorno a tutti. Ciao.